Today, March 15th, 2021, I, Maya Hill, the interviewer, will be interviewing Miss Yolanda Phillips. Location is over Zoom. This interview is for the Black Student Alumni Oral History Project. So welcome, Miss Yolanda. I am so happy to have you here today with me to talk about your experience at Penn State. So just to jump right into some of the questions that I have for you, can you just tell us where you're from and when you were born?
Okay, first I'd like to say thank you for having me. I feel like this is very important information to be able to pass on to future students or researchers. The time at Penn State was very unique and was during a very tumultuous time, I would say. Yes. So about myself, my family roots go back to over 200 years ago in Westchester, Pennsylvania. My great-great-great-grandfather lived there in 1800, and every generation afterwards lived in Westchester. My grandfather himself, and I know all this information, I did a lot of genealogy along with my mother and sister. My grandfather, he moved to Westchester in 1905. He lived at 304 East Gay Street until he died. So that is over like almost 100 years ago that happened. He had 10 children.
Wow.
And eventually they all grew up in that house, but eventually they moved to their own homes, but they were like literally just blocks away. Westchester was a small town. Okay. Now my mother stayed there at my grandfather's house, and she raised me and my 4 brothers and sisters there and helped take care of my grandfather. I do have a picture I'd like to show you. Let's see, you can see that. Mm-hmm. That's my grandfather, and my mother is right here, and her twin sister, my Aunt Jerry. And these are 2 of my grandfather, my mother. I'm showing this picture because they are 2 of the most influential people in my life. My grandfather, he was such a gentleman. You saw the hat he had on. When he walked down the street, he would tip his hat at the ladies, you know. He was an astrologer. He did astrological charts. He loved math. He read math books for fun. He loved to cook. He made homemade root beer. He brew it up, put it in these dark brown bottles, capped them, put them in the basement. And when they were ready to drink, they were the best. He was just a great cook. My mother was also a wonderful cook. She was very multi-talented. She was she could write so well. In fact, I found a novel that she had written. She never did anything with it, but I ran across the draft. She was very artistic. And I also think she was an angel to have taken care of 5 children. Mm-hmm. Because now that I have 2 children, I really appreciate what she did. So, and when I talk about my family, it's like an extended family, a close extended family, because remember, they all grew up in this house. They lived a few blocks away. They were always at the house that my grandfather lived in. And I had cousins, and we were just a very, very close family. So when I speak of family, I'm referring not just to my brothers and sisters or my mother. I'm talking about this whole family. We were very, very close.
Wow, I love that story. And I think it, even in starting off this interview with that kind of sense of growing up in a community, it kind of translated into your experience at Penn State when we talked prior. So I do in regards to your family, were you the first person to go to college in your family? I know you mentioned your grandfather, he was an astrologer and he loved math. So were you the first one to go to college, or was college also an expectation for you as well, like by your family? Like, this is something we want you to do.
Well, no. Well, here's the thing. And I'll go back and talk more about elementary and high school for myself. Mm-hmm. But to answer that question, all of his children did graduate from high school, with the exception of two people. I think they dropped out early on to help out at home. So, and then I had one aunt who became a nurse, a cousin who went to Lincoln, and my mother, just after she entered Westchester State University, she had to drop out because she was pregnant. Mm-hmm. So, and an expectation, you know, when you ask that question and I look back, it's not like we ever sat down and had a discussion about me going to college. Mm-hmm. That just never took place. But there was an assumption. I think there was just an assumption I would be going to college because of things that happened during high school, which I will talk about with you.
Yeah, so I kind of jumped the gun a little bit in asking you about college, but I kind of wanted to relate that experience even in the town that you grew up with also the community that you, like I said, eventually established at Penn State. So just jumping back to your high school and elementary school experience, did you ever experience any form of discrimination, knowing that the town in Westchester that you lived in, your family had lived there for over 200 years, so there was a history there. So did you experience any discrimination when you were in elementary school, or even the community that you lived in? So this is going to be a two-part question, like the community that you lived in, being that, you know, your family is African-American, like how was your whole community African-American, and what was that like? And then also when you went to elementary, middle school and high school, did you have a diverse experience with, you know, other students, or was it just an African-American population?
Well, you have to remember Westchester is a northern town. Mm-hmm. And so you would expect a certain amount of progressiveness. However, that did not exist. We had a substantial Black community. We were not the majority by any means. Half the Black community lived on the east side of town. The other half lived on the west side of town. We had our own community center. We had our own restaurants in town. We were a close-knit Black community. Everybody knew everyone else in Westchester. It wasn't a big town either, but there were a substantial number. And there were quite a number of people who are old families like ours. I don't know if they go back 200, but I know they go back to when I was a kid anyway. So there was a substantial number. But living in Westchester, you knew you didn't go in certain stores. And at that time they had Woolworths. Mm-hmm. And you were barely allowed in Woolworths. And then if you went to the counter, it was the kind of thing you just got your stuff and left. So, there were overt forms of discrimination in Westchester. And just to show you, would you believe that I went to the same elementary school as my aunts and uncles? Wow. And that's because Westchester had the only school system in Pennsylvania that maintained a separate school for colored people. Yes. Wow. And I use the word colored because that was the word at the time. Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind, I'm taking a writing class, and I wrote about that experience. If you don't mind, I'll read a few excerpts from it. So in 1856, Gay Street School was established as a colored elementary public school. The colored students attended elementary school at Gay Street, then moved on to the integrated high school. I attended 1st through 3rd grade at Gay Street. The principal and staff were all colored, and I use the word colored because that's the word of the time, and provided a really nurturing environment to the point where they knew me, they knew my nickname, they knew my family, and I knew if I did anything wrong, it was immediately getting back to my family. It was that kind of a school and community, a Black community. And because it was so nurturing, all those factors, I loved that school. I just loved it. Then in 1954, we got a letter stating that we had to transfer. And this was due to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education desegregation ruling. So Westchester was legally mandated to end desegregation of its schools. So as a result, I did move to integrated schools in the school system. Then moved on. I want to talk about the high school experience. So in 1962, I attended Westchester Senior High School, which, as I said, we had now had integrated schools. They had an academic tracking program where students were assigned either to the technical trade track, the general track, or college prep track. And as you would probably assume, the Black students were placed in the technical trade or general track. Mm-hmm. And we were not given any say in that selection. And I was scheduled to go into the general track. I actually ended up in the college prep track. It was only in recent years, I'd say about 15 years ago, I found out why. Because there was a Black faculty member who argued with the administration and the teachers to get me into college prep track. Mm. That's the only way I got in there. So that's what really helped me in terms of being ready for college, because they had a very good educational program at the high school. And so I had the educational preparation that I needed in order to be accepted at college. Mm-hmm. It does disturb me that the students who were placed in the general track or technical probably felt that they were not worthy. Mm-hmm. Yet I know of people who overcame that mentality, like my cousin. She had a few kids, but later on in life, she went back to college and got her master's in education. So I was really proud to see that. But that was my high school experience. Also, you didn't receive encouragement as a high schooler to go to this school or do this or do that. For example, I would read about computers, and I was mesmerized by what I read. And so I went to my high school math teacher, and I asked him, he had a poster in his classroom for a computer camp. And so I asked him if I could go to camp, and his name was Mr. Geschwind, and he was German. And he said in his German accent, he said, "No, I don't think you would be interested." Mm-hmm. So I didn't go to computer camp. So it was a good educational experience, but not one that encouraged you as a Black student to do better.
Yeah. How did that experience, even hearing, no, I don't think you will be good at going to computer camp by your instructor at the time, how did that make you feel? And even going from an all Black elementary and middle school, where you were, like you mentioned, you were nurtured, that you were encouraged, you were supported, so that you could go on to the next level and excel. So how do you believe that the things that you experienced in high school, that they propelled you and allowed you to continue to thrive in a sense of, I can do this. I'm supposed to be here. I am gifted enough. Like you said, the Black teacher who kind of advocated on your behalf to say, like, no, you need to be in the college prep track. Like, so even in hearing that and allowing that to track over your mind and through your memories of your time in high school, what were those feelings? Because I think those are real. And then going into Penn State, like probably having almost similar feelings, is like those things are pretty real. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm realizing there's a parallel to my time at Penn State, because I was in class with all white students, and we really didn't socially interact at all. We were in the classes together, mm-hmm. and there were a few girls I was friendly with, and to this day, I still think of them in good terms. But generally, you were isolated in class. There wasn't that social interaction. There was academic interaction, but after class, no, you would never see these people or go to their events or go to their home or anything like that. I I was basically a hardworking student. I was in a lot of sports. I played basketball, lacrosse, hockey. I was in all these different sports teams. But I would come home after that in the evening. All of us kids would sit around the dining room table studying, and I would stay up and study. So I was a hardworking student who, I guess I never had an attitude about, well, I can't do this. I think I always had that kind of an attitude that I was always a positive thinking person. And I guess when people would say you can't do something, I would think, well, why not? It's like, sure, I can do that. Like my computer, or the teacher, the math teacher who told me about the camp. When I look back, I was a very shy, introverted person. So I didn't have the good sense to say, well, I want to go. Mm-hmm. I didn't have that. And my family never really got involved at school unless something traumatic happened. I can't think of anything like that. But they were not, it wasn't like parent-teacher meetings and stuff occurred. So they didn't even probably know that I wanted to do that, But I don't know. I just feel in general that my personality, though, was always very positive and just assumed that I could do certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. That's a right type of attitude to have, especially when, being in the time in which you did grow up and knowing that the reality of people not liking you or people thinking so much less of you because of, the color of your skin, et cetera, is kind of just like, well, you have to tell yourself these things. So we're going to transition over to your time at Penn State. So how did you hear about Penn State, and was Penn State the only school that you applied to when you were looking at university? Like, who helped you through that process? And did you ever think about wanting to go to an HBCU, because you did have that experience when you were in elementary school, not in an HBCU, but in a all African-American, setting, in a learning environment, so how did you hear about Penn State? What is that story?
Well, I'm kind of thinking maybe my guidance counselor told me about Penn State, because I personally knew nothing about any colleges or universities. I just didn't have that kind of information flowing into me from anyone in my family, because they were not, school, college oriented or anything. So I would say probably that kind of thing came into me through maybe the school counselor about Penn State. And I know I remember I interviewed at Swarthmore. Someone recommended me to Swarthmore University, and they called me in for an interview, and I went for the interview. They didn't accept me. But at the same time, when I look back, I felt academically, when I reflect on it, academically, I was probably very qualified, but I don't think I had that overall encompassing type of personality. I was very introverted, very shy. Mm-hmm. I would think they would want someone who had a high confidence level and that type of thing. That's what I was thinking. But anyway, so Penn State somehow got on my radar, and I did go visit Penn State. I went for a campus visit to see it, and I loved Penn State. When I say I loved it, I love the physical setting. I love the trees and the spaciousness of the campus, and I just thought it was beautiful. And when you ask about, did I consider another university, I actually thought about Westchester State University, okay? Because it had I loved that university. I loved the campus. It was very pretty. But the only problem was it was in Westchester. Mm-hmm. And I just did not want to stay in Westchester. It was a quiet town. I needed more adventure. I was always a person who had a lot of, who liked to be stimulated. And so Westchester was a very sleepy town in those days. Nowadays, it's the happening town. It's been gentrified and it's the in place to live now. But I wanted to get away. So I went up, I saw the campus and decided to go there.
So when you got there, did you go to a Commonwealth campus?
Well, that was another thing I wanted to mention.
Yes.
I did not have to go to a Commonwealth campus. And just about everybody I knew who went there did go to a Commonwealth campus. Ogontz was a big one because a lot of people, most people up there at that time either came from Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the folks went to Ogontz campus. And I can't remember the campus they went to in Pittsburgh, but I was sent directly to main campus. And I'm thinking because it wasn't close enough to commute to any other, there was no campus close by. Mm-hmm. So maybe but they could have sent me to one of the Commonwealth campuses, but they didn't. They sent me straight up to Penn State.
So when you first arrived, yeah, that is, I'll jump to that, but that is a lot of the people who I talked to, they did start off at besides the guys, a lot of the guys, they made it on main campus their first, go around. But for the females, they started off at Ogontz or Du Bois, or those are the only two that were mentioned thus far. But and knowing Miss Carroll, she went to a completely different university. So at her freshman year, due to being accepted into a Commonwealth campus. So when you first got on, like when you got adjusted at Penn State, when you arrived on campus as a freshman, where did you live, and like what was that experience like? Were you excited? Did you still have that same excitement when you came to visit, or how was that adjusting when you saw everybody, a wave of like 25,000 people amongst yourself? Like how was that adjustment for you?
Well, my mother and a friend drove me up to Penn State, and we unloaded my stuff and put it in the dorm room, and they left, and I cried. I sure did. I sat there and cried. And
that is relatable for me too. I cried. I told myself I wasn't going to cry. Tears poured out of my eyes. I'm like, wait, hold on. Where are the tears coming from?
I didn't know what that was all about, but I cried because they left me there, right? Even though I wanted to be there, they left me. So anyway, and when I think about it, my mother probably cried on the way home. I never asked. So, but I had a white roommate. Her name was Bonnie, and Bonnie was a very sophisticated freshman, very, very sophisticated. She had her beautiful blonde hair, and she did her makeup, and she had a boyfriend at West Point. So she was very sophisticated, but we got along well. We did get along well. And we never had any issues or anything as roommates. Mm-hmm. Later on, I did tell her, I said, I'm going to get I decided I wanted to change roommates. And she said, well, I understand. She knew I wanted to live with a Black roommate. And she was like, yeah, I understand. I often wonder, if she ever married the boy from West Point. But anyway, so she was my first experience there. And I don't remember what dorm I was put in at the time. I'm not sure. But and so it took a while to understand what I had moved into. Mm-hmm. It took a while. Actually, I was very fortunate. About my third day on campus, I was walking across campus, and a Black student came up to me, introduced herself. Her name was Erless, and Erless is to this day my lifelong close friend. I talk to her once a week.
Wow.
And she introduced herself, and I'll tell you, she's the one that saved me. She introduced herself, and she said, well, come on, let's go over to the student center. That's where everybody is. And I went in there to the cafeteria, and there was like maybe 20, 25 Black students in there just sitting around, And so she introduced me to everybody, and the guys were flirting and everything. I said, oh, okay. So I was really lucky that I made that connection so soon. after getting there, because you walk around campus, you never see a Black person. You go to your class, you never see a Black person. So I was very lucky to run into a Black person on my third day there. Now that sounds like a strange thing to say, but you have 25,000 students on campus. 300 are Black students, and it's a humongous campus all spread out. So yeah, you're not going to run into Black students walking around campus. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that, especially with the number of how many Black students there was at the time. So what was your major, if you can talk about your major, and how did you decide your major? Did you know going in what your major was going to be, or did you change it?
Well, I was, as I mentioned earlier, in high school, computers caught my attention. I was always a science-oriented person, although I had wanted to do interior decorating, but for some reason I didn't have confidence. Like I said, I was very introverted and shy, so I didn't have much confidence in myself to get into that major. But computers fascinated me, and Penn State offered very few computer classes. At that time, it just was not that, computers just weren't that well known then. And they offered some classes more on the graduate level, if you took one. So I decided to become a math major. Oh my goodness. Because I was a really, really good math student in high school. My math teacher, in spite of his not letting me go to the camp, he was a really good math teacher, and I liked his method and I absorbed it. But when I took my first math class, first semester, it was 8 a.m. It was in one of those big auditoriums with 300 students or something. And he said everybody alphabetically. I was set right in the front first row, directly in front of him. And every morning at 8 o'clock, I would fall asleep in the class, right in front of him. That was like so early in the morning to me. Needless to say, I didn't do too well in that class. So I changed from math to science. I became a science major, which I really liked, because as a science major, your requirements had you take this broad range of science classes, all types of sciences, chemistry, physics, biology, math, computers if you wanted. And it allowed me to at least get in a couple computer classes. So I became a science major. And I really liked, one of the good things about Penn State, their education, was they had so many class selections, topics that you could pick from. So I really enjoyed the variety of classes I could choose. So I think I like that freedom of being able to take just about anything I wanted, and it fulfilled a science requirement. So and I stayed in that major. Yeah.
Did you find yourself having supports in the science field? Did you find that you can go to your teacher and get the support that you needed, or like that you just had to do things kind of on your own?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm just surprised at the question, because no, it just never even occurred to me that would happen. I didn't get support from teachers or students. I didn't know anybody. I would go to class and not know a single person in the class, not make any friends in the class. The teachers, nobody, nothing. There was absolutely no interaction with teachers, students in classes. Yeah. So that's why your question, like, really? Did anybody have that kind of interaction? I hope they did. They had a more positive one than me.
I mean, I guess I asked the question because there were, being as though like you were the only, one of the few African Americans in the classes that you were taking, even in asking some of the other interviewees about, did you receive support from your professors, or how did it feel? Like, what was the environment like? But like you said, you just went to class, did what you had to do. So I guess in asking that, I was just wondering, like, what was the relationship between, like, for African American students, did you feel like comfortable going to your professor and saying, oh, I need help, or talking to someone in your class and say, oh, would you be willing to help in this? Or was it just kind of like the sense of independent, like, college independency, which I am kind of getting from you, like college independency, you do this on your own, you make it through, and, you get help from people who you can go to. I know, like, in one of the interviews, it was mentioned that in the sorority and fraternity life, like, you guys would do your homework together, or some people would do their homework together, get assignments done together, help each other out. If you needed to be tutored, like tutor someone type of thing. So yeah, I was just wondering, in a sense of like,
well, no, I never really asked for help. It was never offered to me. I do remember, though, and I have to thank this one Black grad student who I did go to for help, because I think he might have been my lab instructor. Mm-hmm. So I did go to him. He tutored me. I was doing okay in chemistry, but if the only way I could really get a decent grade was if I had an A on the final, and that didn't look likely. He tutored me, and I ended up with an A in the final.
Wow.
And so I was able to, I think I ended up with a C in a course or something. I don't remember. I guess maybe I needed a high enough grade so that it would be accepted as my requirement. Mm-hmm. But so I did turn to him, and he was very helpful, and I thank him to this day. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one more question before jumping into, like, the social life of Penn State and how you got involved in that. Did you see how the racial climate in the time in which you were at Penn State, which is, like, 1964 to 1969, your time, or 1965, 1969, your time at Penn State, did you see, like, how the racial climate in the nation was had an effect at the university? Or would you say that the things within the nation, or even across the university campuses, that other African American students were, facing with, like, the other racial issues that, they were dealing with, do you think that those experiences were really present at Penn State, or were they kind of just like, oh, African American students are here, they're just here, we don't have to say anything, we don't have to do much, they're just here type of thing? Or were the like I said, the racial things happening in the nation kind of pouring into the college life?
Well, Penn State was very isolated. It was literally on top of a mountain in the middle of the state, and it was very isolated. TV reception was very poor. I mean, back then, the only thing they had was cable TV, which I never heard of until I went to Penn State. And it's not cable TV as we know it today. It was cable TV to get 2 or 3 local stations. And it wasn't like we got a lot of input from outside, like TV, radio. We just weren't getting that kind of input. It's not like if we'd probably been in a city like Philadelphia going to school, and everything's going on all around you, and you have real TVs and radios, and you're hearing the latest stuff about what's going on in the country. So, and newspapers, we had newspapers. I don't know how much we took the time to read them. It probably depended on the individual. So I don't know that we had a lot of coming into us about what was going on. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we had a sense of what was going on. We did go home, we did talk to people. So we had a sense of those kind of things that were going on in the country, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we were not ignorant, but we were not as bombarded with information because of our isolation.
Okay, so now we're going to just shift into.
Can I go back to one more thing regarding going to Penn State? the financial aspect of going to Penn State. That was another factor in choosing Penn State, because it was relatively affordable compared to other schools. Mm-hmm. Okay. In fact, before I started talking to you, I found these old files of things from Penn State, and I actually found tuition receipts. Tuition and room and board was like $500.
Wow.
I can't believe it was that cheap. And so that was $1,500 a year. Okay. Now that was a lot of money to me. I didn't actually have that. So I made it using the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistant loans and maybe some government loans. Going back to the high school, I did get one scholarship for $300 that came from a local Black organization. Mm-hmm. So the high school did not help in that, help out financially. And then I worked in the dining hall. And to this day, you learn something from every job. To this day, they taught us to go around and clear the table. You pick up all the forks, put it in one cup, pick up all the knives, put it in a cup, pick up all the spoons, they go in a cup. Well, to this day, when I clear a table, I still go around and do that. So you learn something at every job. The other two, though, I had two cousins who worked for AT&T as telephone operators back then. So they were able to get me a part-time job during the summer and over Christmas holidays breaks as an operator, telephone operator. But back then, the long distance calls were made at the switchboard where you had to plug into the switchboard. So it's not hardly like it is now. So this was the old fashioned way of making phone calls. So I got a job doing that, but ironically enough, in recent years, I worked at AT&T, MCI, Verizon as a computer project manager.
Wow.
Helping with their telecommunication systems. So I went the full round doing that. But all that to say that financially, Penn State was somewhat easier to go to. Being a state school, it was a much more affordable school. And that may be part of the attraction for a lot of the other Penn Staters who went there, because it was affordable. And it was also good because I was able to pay off my loans, because it wasn't extravagant in terms of money. It was still a bit, but still. So, yeah.
I wish my semesters were $500. That would have blessed me so much. $1,500 a year.
That's unbelievable. The room and board was actually more than the actual tuition. Room and board was like $300, and the tuition was like $200 or something.
Yeah, so, maybe I can write Penn State and say, you guys should change the tuition, make it a little bit lower. Take it down to $1,500 a year
from the 60s.
Yeah, from the 60s. I mean, history repeats itself. So who knows? Maybe that will be in the repeating pattern of history. Maybe someday, I don't know. Probably not. The tuition will probably continue to increase. I highly doubt. I know. Yeah. So going into the social life at Penn State, I know you mentioned the first time we talked via phone, you mentioned that was a very powerful way for a lot of African Americans to connect, through the sororities and fraternities, and from the parties, from the get-togethers, from all of those different realms. So if you could mention, I know you were in a sorority, you can mention the sorority that you were in, and then also talk about that experience and how that also played into your time at Penn State and how it made it what it was, and it made it actually enjoyable, having that sense of sisterhood, having that sense of community, and support on campus.
Well, let me say this. The 300 students who went to Penn State to this day could, even if we haven't seen each other in 40 or 50 years, we could call each other and it'd be like we talked to them just yesterday. There was such a connection. There is a connection that's really unbelievable. My best friends to this day are many Penn Staters. We formed a very, very tight bond, I think, from our struggles there, but also from our fun activities there. And the core to most of the activities was the fraternity and sororities. The fraternities had houses, the Kappas, the Qs, and the Alphas, they had houses. And the AKAs and Deltas, we had sorority suites. And that was our weekend entertainment. We just went from one place to the other, having a great time together. And I am an AKA. Here's my certificate as an AKA that I received. And I also have a Kappa pillow that I got because I was the Kappa queen in 67 or 68, I forget. Yeah. So, but it was just a lot of fun. You just got to know people so well. And as I said, to this day, you will do anything to support them and help in any way that you can. Now, there were other things that we did. We had the jazz club. Mm-hmm. And they brought great entertainment to Penn State, just great entertainment. Like Smokey Robinson or Alvin Ailey. To this day, I am the biggest Alvin Ailey fan because of the exposure I got to Penn State to them. I would have never seen them if it wasn't for that. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've never seen Black art in that form at that level before. It was amazing to see. And I just still love Alvin Ailey to this day. And then there was as I said, the Black Student Union. Mm-hmm. We did, one year we did a montage where it was poetry and dance. And we put on a program. It was very, very nice. It was a lot of poems, a lot of people up on stage reciting. In fact, I remember I didn't recite, but I was the backup person for one of the students, and he was reciting his poem. And the idea was if he forgot something, I was there to whisper into his ear and let him know. Well, I was so mesmerized by what he was saying that when he forgot something, I wasn't focused. I wasn't paying attention. And I just let him flounder, and then he finally got it back, but I was so absorbed in what he was saying. But that was another event that, again, pulled all the Black students together. And there were students, a lot of people did become fraternity and sorority members, but there were independents who did not join, but they were still all a part of the mix. Yeah. And as I said, I lived in the sorority suite, and we probably maybe had 20 to 30 people living in the suite. We had a wing in the dorm, McElwain dorm, mm-hmm. and we were given a wing, and we had a large living room area and kitchen, and we even had a TV in there. So that's where we would congregate throughout the day. We played a lot of pinochle. If anything, I probably got a master's degree in pinochle playing. That was everybody's game, pinochle. Even double deck pinochle. We were really something. But that's where we would congregate, have sleepovers, have our parties and in the suite. Mm-hmm. So a lot of good memories from that. Yeah. And just being able to, at night, congregate in each other's rooms and just have girl talk and that type of thing. So very memorable times.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun and a way of creating community. I know for one of the interviews mentioned that it was a sense of survival for a lot of African-American students at that time. And of course, there were independents, but joining a sorority or a fraternity was was a community in itself, and it allowed the Black students to feel a sense of home, like a piece of themselves still on campus amidst all of the other students. So since you did bring up Montage, I was going to jump down a whole host of things in, how the Black community was established and all other social lives. But I kind of want to jump back to 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. What was the dynamics on campus for you? Like in hearing that news, how was that experience for you? And what did that strike in you? Because I know Montage happened in May of 1968. So kind of what can you, just walk through, like, what was your emotions then? Like, what were you feeling as an African-American student, on Penn State's campus at that time? Like, one of the greatest leaders in history has been assassinated, and, probably growing concerns for all African-Americans around the nation. So what was that experience like for you? And what kind of, I guess, I don't want to say just like, what did you feel, but even in what support were you given through your sorority sisters or the fraternities? Like, what sense of kind of community was that for you guys in hearing that news?
Well, it was, needless to say, it was just a very sad moment for us, for history. It was just very sad. I think it helped, if anything, it focused our energies. At that point, we became very, very activated to do something. Mm-hmm. That was a period on campus when we got together, Black Student Union. We made demands to the university, and I think this was generally going on across the country, but it did result in that kind of activity and action. We asked for more Black teachers. There were very few Black teachers. I don't know if I ever had one, except for the grad student. We wanted more Black students on campus. We wanted more Black courses mm-hmm. for the school. So it motivated us to be active. I know you know about the brick. We built this brick wall mm-hmm. on campus, which was really amazing. When I look back, all these Black students walking around with bricks in their hands up on main campus, and Black men carrying a brick. I'm surprised nothing happened to any of us. Yeah. But we built our brick wall. We went in and we sat in the president's office. We sat in there, which is something else they were doing across country. I remember going on a bus trip down to Harrisburg, the capital, to speak to the legislators there. I call him our historian, Rick Collins. He knows a lot of the details about these things, and I would refer a lot of the detailed information to him. But it felt good to be doing something instead of just sitting and being mad. Mm-hmm. It felt good to actually be able to do something that may bring you some gains to the Black environment and the Black student life there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a sad moment, but I think it propelled us forward in a lot of ways.
So being that you were one of the student activists, and I use that term graciously because I don't know if you consider yourself a student activist, but being a part of a movement, being a part of change, that does make you a activist in some sense or another. So what was your role in student activism, and where did you really see yourself in being a part of the Douglas Association, being just where did you see yourself in the midst of the 13 demands and going to Harrisburg? Where did you find your placement, and what were some of the things that you saw yourself, that you remember of yourself doing in those times, whether it be rioting, whether it be speaking, like, being a spokesperson for one of the organizations, whatever. Well, I don't know what that entails, but what were some of those things that maybe like where you found yourself?
I think I wasn't necessarily the leader. I wasn't the leadership, so to speak. We had some very strong leaders, Rick, Fred Phillips. They were very strong leaders and had excellent ideas on how to move forward. But I was definitely a supporter, whether it was verbally or just my physical presence and my physical support, my verbal support was going on. Just like I said, I went on the bus trip up to Harrisburg. So, I was part of the numbers of people who were there to support what we were presenting. So I would say that was how I participated, primarily as a supporter with my voice and my presence, and also throwing in ideas when I had some, definitely. Yeah. So, and I also feel some of our requests did happen. We did get a Black history class. I remember. I don't know about other courses, but I remember we did get a Black history class. We did get some Black instructors. We got more students, like in my last year there, 68 to 69, I think 1,000 more Black students came to Penn State. And remember, we're only 300. We get 1,000 more Black students. Now, which was really great. And it was my last year. I wasn't as involved in a lot of things, but, I became friends with some of them. And, but I think one thing that troubled me was that a lot of them didn't stay. I feel like the thing we didn't get for them was the support they may have needed to be able to stay. I mean, it takes a lot to go through Penn State because it's very isolated. You're not necessarily prepared for being in this all-white academic environment. And maybe also some of the students didn't have the study skills or whatever. I don't know what reason they left for, but I was a little disappointed when I heard that different students had dropped out. And I think that was because they weren't giving the kind of support they needed primarily. But it did increase the numbers. Now, I don't have any idea what the numbers are today or what they've been over the years. I don't know. But it would take a lot to get any great percentage of students there. So I just don't know what it's like now.
Yeah, I would have to say I believe it's like 8% or 10%. Now I believe that total is amongst all Commonwealth campuses collectively.
Oh,
the numbers have increased. I think if I can still say that, which I mean, there were some moments where it was hard, but say that I was one of the only African American students in the class, you can see that it's not a huge number of African Americans who are coming to Penn State. So I think like that kind of that says something as well. And maybe it's not simply because they don't get accepted. But I also think that the acceptance rate on main campus, like when I got accepted, I know people were like, "Oh my gosh, you got accepted to the main campus," and I was just like, "Wait, I didn't know anywhere else to apply to." Like, first Penn State wasn't my first option, but because my family went there, it was like, "Oh, apply to Penn State." So, like when people were even so shocked that I got excited and got accepted to main campus, I was just like, I wonder why people are, were like so surprised that I had the grades, I had, the scores that I needed to get accepted. So what was that surprise from? But, even in looking back, that not a lot of Black people get accepted into main campus their first go around. So I think that kind of says a lot of how Penn State has transitioned. It has, of course, it still is a predominantly white institution. So I don't think it's going to become like an HBCU, tons of African-American students, but even in the terms of what does diversity and inclusion look like, like you said, that support that African-American students were lacking when 1,000 African-American students arrived to campus, but they left because they didn't have support. A lot of people end up dropping out. A lot of people can't, continue on because they don't have the support that they need to make it through at such a large university. And freshman year, they weave you out. Like they're trying to weave you out. Like, so I think that's another thing. But yeah, so it kind of is the same.
I have a question. I heard maybe a few years later, or just, I'm not sure what time period, but like I said, we were a very cohesive Black group of students during the 60s. But I think I heard that the cohesiveness was not there years later amongst the Black students. Mm-hmm. Do you know what, if they felt that, if it existed or not, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, the Black community does exist. I think now that they have the PRCC, the Paul Robeson Culture Center, which was a part of the 13 demands that were listed in 1969, like having a Black student center. So now that they have that, that's a place where a lot of minority students meet to gather with one another. Like you'll see a lot of people of color there. But I know when I was talking to my mom and her experience at Penn State, she mentioned that it was kind of like there was a Black community, but it wasn't, like you said, the cohesiveness of, still being friends to this day, or the community that was built that lasts through generations, as you mentioned, type of thing. So I think it has changed. Speaking for today, I guess I was involved in certain Black organizations, so I would go to different events per se, but I wasn't in any leadership position. I know people who were in the leadership positions who worked really hard to get different things for African-American students on campus, which was amazing. Just having different programs, having different speakers, some of really good speakers on campus. And it was like, wow, like this is amazing, bringing these people here. But I think they're still, I think you make friends on campus, and let me say that I think you'll build friends with people, but because the number was so small of African Americans at the time, 200 compared to over several thousands of African Americans, you're going to find niches with other people, especially in the classes that you're taking. So I think that's also makes it very different in a sense of the close knit community that the people from 69 and maybe even the people from 70 may have experienced, but till now. And my mom went to Penn State 1990s. So it's like, even then it kind of still was changed. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's there. I don't want to speak on something but I personally, I didn't experience that, sense of oh, we only have each other type of thing, because again, I was involved in other things. It wasn't, now that Penn State has so many organizations, so many different things that you can be a part of, it does make it completely different. It's not like, we only had sorority or fraternity life where we could, meet up. So I think that comes into play too. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yes, and I wanted to, and you were probably going to bring this up, I wanted to bring up one more activity that helped to draw together, which was the Black Arts Festival.
Yes.
Which I'm sure you're going to bring up. And I wanted to mention it because I had a few mementos from that time period. First of all, I found this, when I moved into the house I'm in now, I stuffed all this stuff in the attic. And recently I had to clean the attic out. That was many years ago. So recently I cleaned the attic out, and there was a whole box full of stuff from Penn State. But I had a folder on the Black Arts Festival. And that was it was in 1969, correct? Mm-hmm. And that was an activity that all the Black students participated in. And we had art. Let me see, I'm trying to find I have the scheduled events. It was the week-long event. And
wow.
And we had James Brown for our activity. We had dancers, we had plays, I was in charge of the art exhibit we had, where, we got donations from various artists and put them on display. And I had to get guards for the room. And the other thing that amazed me was I found all these notes that I took for our various meetings we had to get things organized. And we were really on top of all the details from reading these notes. The other thing I found was the financial report. Okay. Now, the Black Arts Festival cost $13,000 to put on. But when I looked at this report, and you may be able to see, a lot of the money was donated through by the university to pay for this. So I was really surprised at that. I didn't recall that. So that's how we managed to put this on, because it certainly wasn't out of our pockets. We couldn't afford it, the students there. So we did get funded for that, which was excellent. And I want to show you this one other. I have the program that was done. And this drawing on the front was done by Tina Johnson, who is a sorority member and close friend of mine. And then inside, there's a lot of poems that were written and a lot of essays written inside of it. So and I mean, so many people participated in this, in the Black Arts Festival. It almost seemed like all the Black students participated. So again, we put on this beautiful festival, this beautiful event. And I even saw there was a note here about buses coming in, like from OGOT's campus. Wow. So even students came from off campus, which I didn't remember at all until I saw my notes there. So that was another unifying aspect of life for Black students at Penn State. Very unifying. Yes. Black Arts Festival.
Yeah, I know. That's in my paper. I talked a lot about Black Art Festival, and it seemed like it was a ball, and it gave like you said, a unifying sense for the Black community, but also an educational sense for the faculty and also other students at Penn State to appreciate and value, Black culture. And it's not some, distinct or an astray type of culture, but it is a part of, it joins with all other cultures. So yeah, Arts Fest did sound fun. I wish, now that they have, Arts Fest at Penn State in July, I've never been to one. I always wanted to go to one, but I've never been to an arts festival at Penn State. Maybe I'll be able to go back eventually to go to one, but to know that kind of the Black Arts Fest was a segue into the overall community at Arts Fest at Penn State. That's like, wow, you guys really created a legacy and a lot of memories at Penn State. And although certain things didn't happen at that time, like certain things needs were not met, or certain demands were not met, the demands are met now, like so many different, like I said, the PRCC to, increasing the number of African-American students, to having an African-American Studies department, which is like the African American Studies department is really amazing. And then also the African Studies department is one in which I hold to high regard. Some of the best professors and some of the best classes that I've taken being at Penn State. So I think the work that you guys did was not in vain. Like, it came back. And just as we wrap up, because, I don't want to take too much more of your time. We have a few more minutes left, but kind of talking about legacy and memory. So in looking back, now that you're being interviewed almost like 40, 50 years ago, now that you're being interviewed by me, what would you have told your 18 or your 17, 18, 20, 21-year-old self? If you could give yourself advice, what would it be? What would you have told yourself now looking back at at your experience at Penn State?
Oh, the one thing I would have told myself was I needed to have been more disciplined and studied more, because the structure was so free after the structure you have in high school. It was so open and free, and you had all your time to do anything you want. I had no idea that, and I was a really good disciplined high school student, but I had no idea that I couldn't quite handle so much freedom and I didn't maintain my discipline. I think the other thing, though, the big negative about Penn State to me was it was a very isolated community. You were away from stimulation. You had this friendship I talked about, but the overall environment was extremely isolating. And I don't know if I could recommend it because of that. It did impact me later on. When I left Penn State, I went into the computer field, and that's what I applied for when I graduated. And I got a job offer from IBM when I graduated. And I went to an interview in Poughkeepsie, New York. Well, if you ever been to Poughkeepsie, it's just like going to Penn State. It's isolated. It's in the mountains. It's cold. And I turned down the job because I could not go through that kind of environment again. I just wasn't psychologically ready for it. So I had to turn the job down. So I think if you go to Penn State, you got to be psychologically ready for what that does to your psyche. Because I went through some periods of depression while I was there, and I guess other students may have too. And I think it had to do with all the isolation you experienced. In spite of the togetherness on one level, other things were working on your psyche. So those are some of the things I would tell my 18-year-old self.
No, that is really good, and I think that that is a really true statement for a lot of students going away to college and being by yourself, and then going into a place, like you said, where it's not many of you, or you don't have a sense of community. It can be very isolating. So yeah, you had to prepare for that. So maybe the tears that we cried when our parents left, when they dropped us off, maybe they were all worth it. Maybe they had some sort of meaning and reason behind them.
yeah, maybe so. Possibly.
Yeah. So just one last question for you. If you would summarize your college experience in one phrase or one word, what would it be and why?
I would say the word impactful. It was definitely impactful on me. I think I got a great education, which opened doors for me in terms of jobs. At that time in the computer field, I went in the computer field, which I stayed in until I retired. But corporations were who hired you back then, because they trained you. That's how you got your training. So I didn't go to IBM, but I did go to DuPont and work there. And I think that degree and that education opened doors for me. It was impactful in that I told you about all the variety of science classes I could take. And one was molecular biology, which I really loved. And I ended up going to grad school at Howard in molecular biology. So it stimulated me for that. And I will say this, when I went to Howard, it was so great to be at a Black university. And that's when I realized all the nurturing I had missed at Penn State. It was just a great feeling, and I'm glad I had that experience. The other thing that was impactful was the lifelong friends I made there. I'll tell you, my sorority sisters and I, we are together to this day. We get together, try to get together once a year. We talk, we do Zoom, whatever. And not just them, but other Penn State friends too. It also, it opened my eyes in terms of activism. Okay. it increased my self-awareness about myself as a Black person, you know. And I for example, I left there. I was married. We lived in California. We did a for sickle cell, which was really the disease that was becoming known at that time. And so I actually volunteered for sickle cell testing. And I found an article. This is about the sickle cell testing that we did in CI, California. The girl in the outfit, that's not me, but that's how we dressed, in bell bottoms and vests. But it was, you know, we tested people for sickle cell. And I think moving forward in terms of activism, I remember going down to the mall because we were trying to get Martin Luther King Day recognized, have a day for Martin Luther King Day. And in the wintertime, every year they would have something down at the mall for that. Stevie Wonder would come and sing, and we stand in the freezing cold, and we would be out there trying to do that. Or even more recently, of course, going out to support Obama, you know, getting out there, making calls, doing whatever we could do to support Obama. So the activism is with me to this day. And I have to say, activism starts at home. And this family I told you about at the beginning, you have to start in your family. And I do whatever I can to help support and help to move our family forward. So it did have its impact. I learned a lot from the educational aspect and from the friendship aspect, from the activism aspect.
Wow. I think these interviews are getting better and better as I keep going. I'm just like, wow, this how you guys end off the interviews and kind of share what Penn State actually provided for you, impactful. Like that's a really big, a big word, and not saying in its sense of meaning, but a big word in the sense of how it helped your experience as in your afterlife outside of Penn State. So I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to interview you, Miss Yolanda. So thank you so much for, just taking the time to sit and share your experience about Penn State. It really does add to this form and this line of research that I'm working on. And I believe that your participation in student activism and your participation in so many different other things and events that took place during your time at Penn State, being that I was a beneficiary of so many of the things that, like I said, Black study courses or the PRCC, so many of the other things that you guys kind of stood up for and were demanding. A lot of African-American students are now being the beneficiaries of those things. So I'm so thankful for your story. And I know that other people who get the chance to see your interview, it will be, they will enjoy it. So thank you for taking the time to be interviewed again. And thank you for just saying yes to this project, because I believe that history is important. And if it's not documented, who's going to tell it and who's going to find it out? If you don't have actually word of mouth, what took place, you don't really know how to piece together a story through photographs or even artwork. So I'm glad that I've been able to take on this task to interview you and several other people and of your friends. Like, let me not say other people like you don't know them, but of your friends, to kind of create a story and mend and rebuild the pieces of the Penn State's history that was not included in the story. Yeah, you could say.
Can I mention one more thing? You mentioned friends. I want to say the other impactful thing is that I would say just most of the people I know that graduated from Penn State did well in their careers. Mm-hmm. They became doctors, lawyers, educators, computer people like myself, engineers, writers. Like my ex, he was a psychologist, and he has 6 offices, some in DC, Philadelphia, Ghana. Wow. There were people who became corporate executives and corporate managers. One example, of one of my friends who went on to do a major development project in Baltimore. Another friend is out in LA right now trying to help save a huge Black shopping mall from the gentrification process. And they have raised literally thousands and thousands of dollars. He heads up a team of people. They've pulled the investment. One of the people on the team is the architect for the African American Museum. I mean, wow. The huge project, and it's a struggle between the people who want to gentrify the community and people who want to improve the community, but keep it for the Black folks. And it's a big battle going on now. You can even read about it in the Times almost any time. And one other person I want to point out is the lady who did this cover, Tina Johnson, Martina. You can look her up on the internet. She's a very well-known artist. She has artwork that's been in the African American Museum, the Smithsonian, various Philadelphia museums in Ghana. So I would say one big impact for me and my friends is that they have gone on to become very successful in their field. And before I go, I'd just like to say thank you for having me. It feels good to be able to talk about the life at Penn State in a very cohesive manner as you asked your questions. And I'm glad it will be available for historians. Being a genealogist, I really appreciate having records available to go and read or look at. It's very important for future generations to have this information. So I thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.